Well, Ben Calder, mate, it is so good to be connecting with you this morning here in Australia, and in it's the nighttime over there in the UK, right?
That's right. Yeah, we're 9 p.m. now. It's pretty dark outside. It's winter. It's cold. We've just had storms battering the coast near where I live, so it's pretty wild right now.
Yeah, well, we're getting hit with storms too. Apparently, it's meant to be a wet summer here in Australia, which is not fun considering how hot it gets, and then you factor in the humidity and everything. It's
Yeah.
like living inside of a sauna for a few months.
Although right now from the UK, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Sauna would be nice.
Yeah, well, look, it's so good to connect with you. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Like I said, pre-podcast, I really love your work and where you come from with an integral perspective. And, I really love to dive right into people's inner world, their individual interior, from an integral lens. So one of the first questions I'd love to ask you is to get a look at your own worldview or universal view of reality. Like, how would you describe your mental model of reality you're experiencing?
I mean that's jumping in definitely. That's such a broad question. I think one of the things that I find interesting about my worldview and kind of having been exploring the integral space now for just over 10 years and having based a lot of the work that I do within that model, I don't know that I really have a fixed model anymore. I think I've got to a point where I keep on moving through different spaces and from a moment to moment basis, there's adaptation because there are so many possibilities. I mean, you know yourself from reading integral work that it starts to open up a view of the world that means there are worlds within worlds within worlds. Ken's beautiful term for it is turtles all the way down, turtles all the way up. And so there's this part of me, I think that the more I've grown and the more I've developed, that just moves around between whatever world space seems appropriate wherever I am. I mean, I live in a strange part of the UK in some ways, in that it's a very white dominated culture, but we have a lot of different levels within that. So we have the ultra rich living, kind of 10 miles down the road from me, royalty level kind of people. And at the same time, a couple of miles down the road in the other direction, we've got some of the poorest people in the UK. And you although we're all in a very kind of similar environment in that sense, we're surrounded by all this beautiful countryside, we're surrounded by the wilds of North Wales, and Cheshire is a beautiful county here. The mind space that exists, the amount of levels that we go through within such a small population is just incredible. So I find that trying to operate on any one particular level means that I sometimes can't interact with the people that I'm engaging with, because you have to be able to take a multifaceted worldview and actually just be able to be with people wherever they are. So, and again, from the kind of the spiritual side of the integral world, I've tried not to attach to any one particular thing as much as I can. So for me, it's more about letting go of worldviews rather than holding on to them.
Yeah, that's so well said. Yeah, to be able to have this flexible, malleable ability to shift your worldview pretty much any time. And I guess with people you're communicating with, to kind of come down to their level or up to their level, whoever you're speaking to resonate and be able to see kind of eye to eye. And, you don't have these miscommunications, which we see a lot nowadays. Many people are arguing over whose worldview is right, or whose religion is right, or whose perspective is right. But it's like relativity. We're all unique, we're all different, we all have a different unique interpretation and perspective of the world. If only we could acknowledge that and then engage in people with that knowing.
Yeah, and I think that's really hard at the moment as well. There are some really, really strong lines of belief and ideas about how we should be behaving, how we should represent ourselves. Again, thinking about how your interest in morals and ethics, it's this is right, this is wrong, this is how you should be, this is how you shouldn't be, that's okay, that's not okay. But those lines really lose the nuance of the communication that's taking place between individuals at any one point. And I don't think it's so much about going up to or down to where anybody else is. It's more a case of just looking at the stimulus that any particular situation that brings into you. And again, if we take it from that kind of 4-quadrant perspective, where's my body in that moment? What's the environment I'm engaged in? What is that cultural worldview and the relationship I'm experiencing with that person at that time? And then how do I stay in the most balanced, stable, healthy space that I can be while that interaction is taking place? And in a way, if you hold any one particular worldview, you kind of lose, to a degree, an ability to be that present in that moment. If one of the teachers that I've worked with in the past, Chinese Grandmaster Sam Chin, he would always ask the question of, where is your referent in the moment? What is the thing that you're drawing your reference from? If it's something from the past, then you're already out of sync with what's taking place in the moment. So the more that you can stay in the moment with whatever it is that you're engaging with, you and I in this moment, how we are, morning there, evening here, all of these factors are at play all at once. And what brings us the win-win? What brings us the best outcome in that situation with all of those aspects in play?
Yeah, I like that, because it's almost like, if you're really in the moment, do you even have a worldview? Or like, it's almost like it dissolves because there is only the moment, and you dissolve into everything in that moment.
Yeah, sure. And that's not to say that we're not still aligning with particular beliefs, morals, ethics, behaving out of any particular psychological perspective at that point. But it's about whether or not we use that as a rod for our own backs, or whether or not it's something that allows fluidity in a moment.
Yeah. So I want to kind of take a step back to, me asking you about what your worldview is, and, you saying that it's constantly ever changing. But I would be curious, because there are obviously some questions to really formulate your own worldview. And I'd like to see the perspective you take in this moment, being, with the question in why you think we are here, and I guess what are we? These two kind of big fundamental questions that I think would build your own kind of worldview or universal view, depending on how far you want to zoom out.
Yeah, sure. And I think the last thing you said there, depends on how far you want to zoom out, is probably one of the most important parts of that. Because how far do we want to zoom out?
Yeah.
Do we want to look at things from a cellular level, from a biological level, for me as a human organism, for a planetary system, for a solar system, for a galaxy, for something bigger? The time scales, distances, and sizes that are involved, depending on where we are, make things completely different. Go the other way down into an atomic level, where again, we're talking turtles all the way up, turtles all the way down. But from that big perspective, and I really value looking at it from a really big perspective. It doesn't matter. Nothing is important. It's irrelevant. We're so irrelevant in terms of anything that is a few scales up from us. That makes every contribution you make relevant. Because if none of it matters, then what's the best value that you can get from it for yourself in any one moment? What's the best experience that you can have in any one moment? And for me, a value within that is to ensure that whatever I'm engaging with is a win-win. It's the best for me and everyone. If we look at it from those kind of basic levels of egocentric, ethnocentric, world-centric, cosmocentric, I want what's best for me on an egocentric level, definitely. I want what's best for me and mine on an ethnocentric level, definitely. I want what's best for me and everyone on a world-centric level. And I want what's best for me and everything on a world-centric level. So transcend and include. I'm not going to exclude any aspect of that. I want to understand and try and choose what I can to create the best experience for everything that I'm engaging with in any moment, whatever that is. So I think if you're helping the energy of any situation to raise and lighten and open until it's the moment to help the energy to lower and contract. So even kind of along the lines of right and wrong, good and bad, depending on where you want to draw your lines, depending on how you want to look at things, it's so difficult to be able to draw a line in the sand and say this is where it is, because there are just too many other factors that might contribute towards why a thing would be a thing. And any time that we're looking at it in retrospect, it's already not the thing it was, and we can never see it in the way it is, and we can never understand it in the way it is. Anytime we're projecting an idea into the future, it can never be what we think it is. It's a very strange life to be living in. So as nothing matters, and really, what are we worrying about with it all? Make everything the best that you can make it, and bring as much joy and pleasure and constructive creativity into any space as you can.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really beautiful perspective. Yeah, indeed. So I'd love to get into your own inner journey and, I guess, awakening. I'd love to just hear about this journey that you've been on, and maybe throughout that, what did you find were some of the most efficient and effective modalities or practices that worked for your own healing and awakening journey?
Yeah. I mean, I think in a way that awakening, and I find that as more time goes on, I see and hear of other people having a similar kind of situation, is that in some way their early life, their childhood had its challenges, and my life was no different in that way. So early separation of my father from my mother, so 2 years old, a lot of moving around when I was a young person as well. And it was only really when we started senior school here in the UK at kind of age 11 that for a short period of time things were kind of settled. By that time I was already kind of, like a cat on a hot tin roof. I was already a bit spooked in life, so I was already quite sensitive, and I didn't feel very grounded, I guess is the way I would describe it now. But I was just a very restless character, and by the time I got into my mid-teens, it felt like there was just a lot of bullshit on around me. I found formal education a challenge. Again, back in the 80s, when this was happening to me, we didn't recognize neurodiversity the way we do now, and we didn't understand learning styles and learning kind of issues in the way that we do now. So I really struggled with formal education, although I kind of managed to make my way through, but only with a certain amount of being a clown and finding a way to just make it easier to transition through what felt to me like a lot of friction and a lot of tension at the time. And when I was a teenager, my mum introduced me to some people that lived near us that were into personal development, psychic development, spiritual development. And we used to go for kind of regular evenings with them. And, this to me was the kind of late 80s, early 90s kind of new age, as it was really kind of opening up in the UK, which was really interesting. And so I got to be around a lot of very, very curious people who are exploring other ways of looking at the world, other perspectives, and really that was for me that introduction into pluralism, if we kind of look at it from that kind of level. And so I was much more interested in that and found that much easier to deal with than kind of mainstream life. And so went to university and continued kind of exploring that while training to be a teacher, and realizing after 4 years that kind of like to go into a school and teach children was A, the worst idea that I probably could have come up with myself, and B, the fact that anybody qualified me to do that just shows that they weren't paying attention. So I really shouldn't have done that, and I didn't. But I did really want to, I really had a strong urge to do developmental work. I wanted to see people progress. And that was really the vision I had. I wanted to see people go from a place where they were struggling or had a tension or a difficulty, and that something I could contribute would then make a change for them, take them into a new space. And I ended up after university going and becoming an outdoor activity instructor, using high ropes courses, abseiling, climbing, that kind of stuff. And at the time, I also I did an NLP diploma, did a whole bunch of, this is kind of 20 odd years ago, some really, really great work, really great people, and was using that in just helping the young people that we were working with, the teenagers we were working with, to just explore different ways of looking at their realities. When you've got somebody standing on a 40-foot high telegraph pole looking to dive for a trapeze, and they're telling you that they can't do it, and you ask them the question of what would happen if you did, and seeing this moment in their head where the pattern that they'd been following just shifted for a second, and it gave them a little space to make a change. And when they made that, they were able to do something that they never believed they could. And there was something about seeing that growth and that opening in people that then really inspired me. And that was about the same time I then started discovering kinesiology as a modality, so manual muscle testing, which I primarily use in lots of different ways, but for physical assessment and biochemical and functional medicine, epigenetic, lots of different ways, again, using the integral model to look at health. And so I went on and kind of developed that as a practice. And all the time within this, I'm using Qigong as a physical practice as well. So I'm looking after myself with kind of using energetics through Qigong, and kind of on we roll for the next kind of 18, 19 years. And really that's where my development goes through, kind of, as I said, 10 years ago, the integral model got introduced, but already that holistic model was surprisingly holding a lot of the pieces of integral. They just hadn't been connected. And I guess at that time as well, the Qigong practice that I'd been doing really kind of started to take off, and I'm working a lot with my brother who teaches Life Force Qigong, which is a beautiful system of Qigong practice. And so, we kind of continued that developmental work together. He's been a really big influence and a really big mentor for me and my work as well. So that's the first part of your question. And the second bit, there's things that really help me. Qigong, hands down, good teacher. And within that, good contemplative and meditative practice. There's no doubt about it. But it's integral life practice. That's really what I'm doing. So body, movement, Qigong, climbing, walking, good diet, mind, studying, continuing to kind of learn your shit, spirit, your meditation, your contemplative practice, and then shadow work. So those elements were love a good shadow. Shadow's beautiful. So kind of doing that integral life practice, but then within that real dedication in work into relationships, the things that then really feed you and make you feel alive and make you feel well. And that's different for all of us. So whatever you do, don't try and copy me. Just, understand the idea. And once you understand the tool, you throw the tool away and you find your own way through it.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted to ask you, what were the most efficient and effective modalities or practices for you that worked for your unique self? I do want to ask a question within this, because it always seems to be an X factor, in people's lives. And you may have already touched on this, but it's either like a significant moment that switches something over, but there always seems to be some sort of X factor in people's lives. I know for me, that would have been a psychedelic journey. That was a big X factor. And then mixed martial arts, that completely shifted my life. It was like a big catapult. Was there anything like that, these X factors or these catapults that really like shifted you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I tend to kind of broadly follow a Zen perspective within my spiritual practice. So, and again, that's been influenced through Ken's work and also through Genpo Roshi. So, I followed his work quite closely for the last kind of 11, 12 years. And kind of do practice in the style of Big Mind and so on. So Big Mind was really a key practice for me. It was one of the things that just made my head go and dissolved. You know, where I thought I understood the vastness of the universe before that, and again, you know, psychedelic experiences at various points, meditation experiences at points, but there was something about Big Mind that just made my head go, oh yeah, that's different. So that was always a big thing. And then my qigong, there's absolutely no doubt that practicing qigong helps to work in a true three body way, you know, gross, subtle, causal, and to really combine that subtle energy work, the emptiness of mind, the non-dual, while still being in a physical presence. It's, you know, it was really deep stuff. So that, you know, Big Mind and qigong, really, those are the tools that I think the real accelerators. You know, I mean, my experiences with psychedelics have been quite varied and always very constructive, very positive. And they're great, but I think you know, Genpo Roshi put it beautifully when he was introducing Big Mind years ago, and he said that, you know, we can go through this process, and at the end of it, you will have an awakened experience. But if you don't continue to practice it, then it'll just become a nice memory of something you did. And in a way, I think that a lot of psychedelics can be that. They have great catalytic abilities, and depending on how they're used, depending on how they're fielded, we can go through that. And I've certainly had my share of those. But I think really the idea of looking for something to accelerate, it all accelerates, it all transforms. So from a Zen point of view as well, having Kensho experiences where, you know, you kind of hit a low point, hit a dark night of the soul, something breaks, something goes wrong. You know, I've had a number of those moments in my life, and those have been as powerfully transformative as any of the others. You know, and this is why, you know, going back to stuff I said earlier, it kind of doesn't matter. You know, don't get too attached to how it should look, what it should be, what it should feel like. You know, just direct it towards something that feels like it'll be a good thing. Look for the green light on your path.
Yeah. Enjoy the movie, you know, just enjoy them. And some people take movies too seriously, you know, where they leave the cinema and
Really?
they think that the you know, the evil thing in the movie is like in their house. And it's like, you took it too literally. Like, just enjoy the movie, leave the cinema and let it go. And then we'll enjoy the next movie that comes up if we decide to come back again and experience a different kind of movie. But you kind of did answer my second question, which was, you kind of spoke about the more light side of the X Factor things, you know, but there's also, like you said, the dark night of the soul, these things that are also what we would label as negative, but are equal in their power to shift us internally and be catalytic in our life.
Yeah, they're just not pleasurable at times.
Yeah.
You know, that's okay. I don't think that for the majority of us, certainly not the lives that most of us are leading, we really understand how, even a couple of thousand years ago, 10,000 years ago, just how difficult it was to survive. Just the real extremeness of life. I mean, again, I'm really lucky where I live. We've got a lot of megalithic sites, very famous old sites that are kind of 5,000 years old from how life was back then, and to you know, up on some beautiful hills and mountains around here, overlooking the oceans out to Ireland, where you've got other structures that are all lined up together. And you go and sit in these places and you think, wow, man, 5,000 years ago, dudes sat up here looking out at this stuff, thinking about stuff. And they had none of the comforts and luxuries that I do. And that, you know, life was tough then. So, you know, in some cases, I kind of use it as a bit of a thing to just, you know, stop whining and appreciate you know, how beautiful we've got things, and how much we've got access to and availability of. And okay, at the moment, you know, there's a part of the world that's kind of going to shit in a handbag, but it's kind of, it's all okay, because the bottom line, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Let's scale up.
Yeah, I mean, it humbles you when you look at what our ancestors went through, and the fact that, most of them didn't even wear clothes, and here we are, like, it's cold, I gotta put my clothes on.
Yeah,
And
sure.
shit,
Turn the
they're
heat
like,
up.
they were like running around naked. I mean, you look at the Aboriginals, they wore no clothes all year round in the cold parts of the world, and of the season, and in the hottest times. We good.
Sure.
We good.
And we can't, and here we are at times bitching that, that super warm new brand new deluxe jacket that I want to get, it's not going to turn up for 2 days. They haven't got it in the color I want.
Yeah.
And this is it. There's an aspect of, I mean, it's interesting for me. I really enjoy watching my culture, because weirdly, it's kind of quite difficult to watch other parts of the world as much as we can watch other parts of the world, but we're not immersed in it in the same way that we are our own cultures. And so I find it really interesting just to watch my culture and see what challenges are going on, and see even, the types of music, the types of art, the types of media that are being produced, and what that's communicating about what's going on inside of people at any one time. I just find it fascinating to observe, while at the same time feeling like this really lucky voyeur to it all, that again, I feel comfortable that it kind of doesn't matter in a lot of ways. And if I get too entangled into it, we get back to Buddhism 101, attachment is the cause of all suffering. So let's just relax a bit.
Yeah. I just want to make one a question or a comment with this kind of statement that you've said, in it, like it doesn't matter. Is that similar to seeing life as like it's just neutral, like it's just balanced, and we then with our constructs can say that's terrible or terrific, but in essence it's just neutral?
Sure. Yeah. And I think in a lot of ways it's a healthier perspective to take. It is to be in allowance of what is going on. And again, Ken has got a beautiful quote that says, you notice it more, but it bothers you less. And I think that's possibly one of the most useful things that I've continued to kind of go back to in Integral, and as a goal within my kind of my spiritual practice, my self-development. I want to get to a point where I'm aware, but I'm not as deeply impacted and as deeply affected by what's going on, so that I can continue to hold my own center, cultivate my energy, and add into the world in the way that I believe I choose is the most valuable in that moment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It may be similar to what I'm going to say, but I might be off. But you know what a Rorschach test is? That ink blot imagery test?
Yeah.
How you pronounce it? Rorschach. So it's almost like that, right? Like the universe is a giant Rorschach test, this ink blot imagery that really says more about our souls and what we believe than anything else. So I think that comes to like, would you take the perspective the world is a mirror of your soul, and it's just reflecting back your internal state of mind to some extent?
I find that a really difficult statement for myself, because I'm just not sure.
Yeah.
I think it, we come back to the Zen question, don't we? If the tree falls in the wood, of course it makes noise. I'm not the center of the universe. Just because I'm not there doesn't mean it doesn't make noise.
Yeah.
Vibration is taking place regardless of me. So is it a mirror of me? Yes and no. Am I just another aspect of the universe, the cosmos, of spirit in action? Probably, and does that really mean anything that I need to get worried about? No. I'm spirit in action, but if I accept that I both create the world and I'm just a part of the world, I have to accept that about everything within the world without exception. So the dog turd on the street, the dog turd that's running our country, any of those things, I have to accept that they are all spirit in action as well, and they are no greater, no less, and no different than I am. They're just different manifestations. And again, it's easy for the small me to get tied into, feel those things, and sometimes that's a choice, and I like that, and because there's a sense of feeling in this body that you just kind of don't get in spiritual neutrality, and so there's something about that I think has value, as long as I can remember to balance it and stay centered and step back into a different space when it's appropriate, which I think is one of the best gifts of Big Mind, is just that you don't hold on to any one perspective, because you realize they're just ways that you're representing the world. So what if we represented it in the opposite way or a different way? It still doesn't make much difference. It just gives you a different insight.
Yeah, and that's so, I find, and I really learned this through Ken in the Integral Life Practice book, and his book No Boundary, and his psychology book, and some of the other ones I've dipped into. I'm still trying to wrap my head around his psychology, but I'm getting there. But just the value in being able to take multiple different perspectives, wide and like deep. People are so stuck in just one perspective, and it's like it's a concrete, hard perspective that they don't even know. Like, you can look at this experience from like 10 an infinitude of different ways. It's like it's up to you how you choose to like interpret everything really that's going on.
Yeah, and if you come back to it in another moment, not even another day or another time, but just in another moment, there might be something that is there now that wasn't there. There might be something that was there that isn't. It can just continue to evolve. That's one of my favorite questions to some of my clients is that, without using words and language, show me where the past and the future are. And it's an impossible question.
Yeah, that shuts me right up.
I always get versions of people pointing forward, pointing backwards, pointing to one side, pointing to the other. And when I say to them, what do your fingers mean? And they have to use words and language to describe, well, that's the past, that's the future. So I said, right, so you have to use words and language, because the only place that they really exist is as a construct inside your head. Even if you take an ancient monument or something like that, and you say, well, that's the past. And it's like, well, no, that's the present, because that's where it is right now. Whatever it was in the past, it isn't that now. So everything's in this constant flux, this constant change. So learning to remember that flow is going to go on, whether you like it or not, whether you attach to it or not, whether you join in with it or not, it's just going to keep on happening. You can't prevent those changes. So learning to just adapt and flow and be with them is the best chance you've got, I feel, of just continuing to get the best out of the moment you've got while you're spirit in action.
Absolutely. There's a part of me that wants to dive down this language rabbit hole, but I want to hold myself back, because like language just itself is so fascinating. And I was just recently watching Greg Braden talk about his new book, the something codes. Anyways, it's just about the power of language, and how we can literally talk to our genes and tell them to express and not express, and our vocabulary, it kind of creates our capacity to see reality. When you're missing a word, it's like you're missing a piece of the puzzle. You just can't quite tap into or unlock that part of reality. But I'm gonna reel myself back in so we can continue along the structure that I
big
intended.
and powerful topic, that's for sure. But you're absolutely right. The construction of our world through the language that we use is probably one of the most important things that we can learn to be aware of.
Absolutely. Well, maybe we will have to set up a part 2 to dive into language. So what I wanted to move into next was to just talk a little bit about spiritual development and what that may mean and look like from a integral lens. So maybe first give the people just an overview of, I guess, what the integral model is from your perspective, and then what that may look like from a spiritual perspective within that lens.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the first thing I want to say is that there are so many different versions of this, even just within integral.
Yes.
That all I am sharing is the part of it that I work with, and fully acknowledge that there are so many other perspectives and depths and values on this. And I think one of the most important things that comes out of integral, though, in terms of spirituality and spirit development is found in the question that Ken posed about how do you define what spiritual is. And of course, you can see spiritual as a line of development. You can see it as a level of development. You can see it as a type. You can see it as an overall, this is how somebody is, so you can see it from almost all of the, or pretty much all of the all quadrant, all level, all line, or state or type, what state of consciousness we're talking about. So, because are we talking about somebody who can reach like a non-dual state of awareness? Is that something that's spiritual? Where we know from the kind of the Wilbecomb's lattice that experience is only interpreted from the level of development that we're at in the first place. Are we talking about somebody that's dedicated themselves? I mean, as a hobby and another part to myself, I love guitars, and I love kind of listening to live music. And there are a couple of artists who I think have achieved a spiritual level of playing. What they're doing is just absolutely insane. And you can see that within sports people. You can see that with anybody that's dedicated to a practice. They reach a transcendent level to it. They're beyond that conventional level. They've reached something special in there. But you can also see it as a discipline in itself. People that are just studying spirituality and just looking at spirituality from different levels, which might start at something like a religious side, a mystical side. You can look at it from different perspectives in that ways. And you might also get people that just have this vibe of spiritual, and I see a lot of spiritual tourism taking place as well, where people are very good at getting the trappings of spirituality as a way of trying the modality on and acting in ways and using language that for them feels spiritual, but then often leads into a great deal of spiritual bypassing and just ideas of transcendence and real development, rather than actually having experienced it or even having put the work in. The amount of techniques and apps and systems that can get you meditating like a monk in 5 minutes, 10 years worth of practice in an hour download, and not really, and I hold my hands up, guilty of all that myself, experienced all of that through phases of my life as well. But I think one of the things that is most important as I go on is I recognize that it's not a done deal. I was doing shadow stuff and connecting to spiritual energies 20, 30 years ago, but that was then, and it's about where we are now. And again, looking at things differently. I think I know less, and I believe less, and I hold on to less than I ever did before. And I'm less certain about what everything is than I ever was before. But I'm more comfortable with that than I ever was before.
Well, that's a good spot to be in, right? That's really interesting to be less certain but more comfortable, to let go. I mean, it sounds so paradoxical, but it also makes so much sense at the same time. Sure. So within this, I guess, what would be, and I know, again, we could do this from levels and lines and states and types, but for the person listening, is there a foundation? Is there just a foundational starting point? And again, that might be within the AQual model, but sure, just if you had to maybe synthesize them or whatever, what would be the base foundational layer to maybe, a spiritual development practice, philosophy, or just within spiritual development?
Yeah. I mean, again, coming from my own experience and my own journey, if I think about how I was before, restlessness would be a good word to describe that. Restless of mind, restless of body, restless of heart, never feeling settled, never able to feel centered, never able to find stillness. And in comparison to then, I have a lot more centering and stillness and feeling of settled within me. And the hardest part of that was actually just learning to surrender to it. Mm-hmm. Because the restlessness is an anticipation. It's a looking for something else, thinking that the thing is going to be somewhere other than where I am at. So, it's the next experience or the next day or, the next whatever. And from the point of view of society currently, we can see there's this constant, pretty much narcissistic, you've got to have something else, something else, something else. And Genpo Roshi talks about the seeker of the way in Big Mind, and that the seeker of the way, the job of the seeker of the way is to seek. So what are you going to do when you find the way? You're going to seek. You're going to keep looking. You keep on moving on. Follower of the way gets to just follow. It's less stressful. But when we become the Tao, when we become the way, we just are. And to do that, we have to surrender. We have to, and I don't mean surrender as in have no boundaries, not being healthy in our behavior, but just within ourselves, just to surrender. And that was, I think, the hardest moment for me was to just learn to surrender to being where I was in that moment and allowing myself to just go, okay, I'm going to surrender. And I started out, I kind of set myself a challenge. I said, okay, I'm going to surrender for a minute. That's all I'm going to commit to. And so I would sit down twice a day and say, right, I commit to surrendering for a minute. And I wasn't even trying to do anything else with my mind. I was just trying to stay where I was. And a minute's easy to do. So, a minute almost always became 2 to 5 to 10 to 15 minutes because all I'd agreed to do was a minute. And so, I did my minute, great. So are you happy here? Yeah, sure, great, stay here. And so just surrendering to being and not constantly having to go into doing. And it's, I think, one of the simplest things to do and one of the most challenging things to do. Because, years down the line, I'm still reminding myself, just keep surrendering, and watching what I'm doing with my energy. Because if you take on board something like Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, and he makes a clear distinction that the stimulus is separate from my response. So this is why he sees language or describes language in parts as violent, because we might describe something as you made me. When you did this, it made me. And that's inaccurate language. The stimulus might have been there, like that beautiful painting you've got behind your head. Beautiful stimulus for me as we're having this conversation. So my response is still my choice, and I can respond in any way that I choose. So learning to have that pause, learning to strike when the iron is cold at times and just breathe and just soften and just become aware of how you've been activated by a thing before you create action. And, I think those are some of the most useful and important things to learn to do. And they're also a lifetime's work.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that surrendering. I want to ask you kind of an obvious question, but it might help with maybe some context. But who is surrendering? When you're talking about surrender, who is surrendering?
Always the voice of resistance. Sure. Because that's the only one that needs to surrender. But also the voice of surrender. Because its only job is to surrender. So we've got to allow it to speak. And that's the challenge. And what's it like to be surrendered? It's surrendered.
Yeah.
It's that simple. We don't need to complicate it. But the voice of resistance, and again, you can describe any pattern there. It could be the voice of frustration, the voice of agitation, the voice of restlessness, voice of desire. I need more. Again, the seeker, not going to stop seeking. Not going to stop looking, but it's about the choice of that point of view in that moment. So, and again, with the sitting that I do, one of my favorite practices is shikantaza, is Zen, just sitting, because then I don't put any expectations on myself other than to sit. And so, there isn't necessarily a voice coming forward because I'm not asking for anything. And so we can, and especially if I can sit, with a nice view, looking at nature, and just sit. Don't think anything of it. Don't make anything of it. Just take it easy.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So something I love within like the integral model is the integral communion, like communing with the power that drives the universe. But in this case, I guess communing with surrendering. Mm-hmm. So is that something that you're trying, like you're maintaining, you're almost communing with this surrendering? It's like a constant kind of process, not even a constant process, but it's something that like you've already laid down, but I guess it's something that you commune with. You can always just come back to this.
I think that this though is one of, for me, is one of the places where we get a little bit of confusion about where some of this space is. So if I take this pen that's on my desk here, I'm as much communing with spirit when I hold this as I am when I sit to commune with spirit.
Yes.
And until we understand that there is no real separation on those, and until we experience it that way, I want my life to be that. So every action, every movement, every breath is all part of this constant interaction with the universe in objective and subjective spaces. All of it is. Every piece of food I put in my mouth, every piece of clothing on my body, every step I take through the world, they're all parts of communing with spirit. And they're all working at different levels, in different ways. And that's beautiful. And I think that's, in a sense, that's part of what the essence of integral is stop thinking about spirit as only being one thing. It's in all of these things, all of the time, without limitation, without hesitation, without pause or separation. It's always happening all of the time in everything we do. And we can take those beautiful moments where we choose to sit in stillness, and if we're going to focus on something, for example, we're moving into a subtle practice because we're creating visualization. We're going beyond the boundaries of necessarily the physical body, perhaps gross physical, but we're not in that emptiness of causal. And in emptiness of causal, even if I'm witnessing, I'm still doing something. There's still a me and another. But in true causal, or going into non-dual, where everything is dissolved anyway, if I can achieve that, or try and achieve that with everything I do, that's to a degree the practice, or realize that I am doing that anyway in everything I do, regardless of whether or not I believe I am. And it's just a case of where we focus in any one time. So do the things that bring you magic, do the things that feel good, play your instrument, do your art, write, dance, play, explore nature. There doesn't have to be a one route to get to these places. You can do it through all of them. If you love horses, and you ride, or you do whatever, you rock climb, anything that feels like it has heart. And that reminds me of a quote by Don Juan in some of Carlos Castaneda's work on the Yaqui shaman of Mexico. He says that all roads lead to the same place, but only the roads that have heart are the ones that are worth traveling. And there you will find me waiting breathlessly.
Oh, I love that. That is so, yeah, that's so good. One of the other things I love from the ILP when we're speaking about this communion is how they describe, I think it's a cosmocentric turquoise or teal level, where it's like I commune with source as source, able to see source alone in myself or with others. And that has really become like my kind of baseline like life philosophy. And if I can recognize that, to remember that I am source, communing with source, everything, I'm wearing source, I'm talking to source, it allows me to approach the world completely different. It's like being in big mind kind of all day to some extent, except, you're not completely dissolved into everything.
Sure. And that's true even when you're talking to the waiter in the restaurant about having mucked up your order.
Yes.
It's no different. It's still
Every
that.
second of
And that,
every moment of every day
yeah,
for eternal.
yeah. And that's what I find beautiful, is and that's what I mean when I say it doesn't matter. You know, we I don't really subscribe to the idea of vengeful gods, of aspects of spirit that are going to get back at you for being a bad person.
Yeah.
I don't think there's enough good evidence
That
for
sounds more
that
human than anything.
for a start off. Absolutely, yeah, sure. And I think that the world, the universe, the cosmos is just exploring itself, in all ways, and there are no limitations to that. And I expect in far-flung parts of the universe, there's stuff that would blow our minds in an instant. But for the universe, there it is. It's just expanding out in beautiful fractals.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Just one more thing, and then we'll wrap this up because I want to be conscious of your time. I know we started a little later, and the other questions I have are only going to open up a whole another hour conversation. So I will save them for another time. But I just wanted to ask you, coming back around to this, it doesn't matter because I find this so interesting. Also, within that, it doesn't matter. Is there also the fact that there's nothing right or wrong and there's nothing broken? It just is what it is. Because I feel like we humans assume that things are right or they're wrong or they're broken or that things need fixing in this world. We need to fix that because there's something wrong with it. But from the point of view that I'm taking with it, doesn't matter. I'm like, it's all good. There's nothing to fix. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing broken. There's just a whole lot to love and appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think everything is always in a state of flux, and I know that for some people when they hear statements like that, they're along the lines of, well, like murder's bad and arson's bad or whatever else, and yeah, there are some things that the effects of them don't contribute in a great way.
Yeah.
Definitely. And there are some things that contribute so little that they actively retard the growth and development and expansion and opening of parts of us and everything, for long periods of time. But there's not a lot, that's then not my choice. The choice that I make is the only one that matters. And so it's up to me to choose to develop the morals and ethics that I feel are healthy, and I know that because I am healthy in them. And our body wears the shape that our mind creates. So if you want to look at whether or not your choices are really serving you, then look at the way your vehicle is performing. Look at the experience you have. And I totally recognize that there are people living under oppressive regimes, so their ability to do some of these things, their culture to be able to think in these ways is very different. And there are people that have experienced horrendous traumas throughout their lives, and that that's heartbreaking on certain levels. But we also, the road leads on, the flow leads on, and all we can do is look at the next choice that we're going to make. How can we make what I'm doing better? How does it get better than this? What else is possible? How can I move into another space given what I know today? Because I know what I know, and I know the stuff I don't know, but I've got no idea what I don't know. Really, the depth of all of that is so extensive. And if the universe does have a master plan, if the universe is trying to move into a particular direction, then I've got to remember that the powers that be on this planet and the way that this planet is moving are all part of that too. And I've often wondered whether or not morally we end up drawing ourselves onto the wrong sides just because of poor ideas that were given to us when we were younger. And just evolving through that and trying to find a way to grow and be healthy, so that you can see that when you have an interaction with somebody or something, that's added value, and really that's where I would go. For me, that's where things do matter. Can I add value into it? And if I get it wrong or it doesn't come out how I want it to be, in a sense, that doesn't matter. Because the moment is past. How can the next moment add value? What can I do instead of rather than just hanging on to all the old stuff and thinking, oh, I'm so terrible, I did that so badly, blah. Let it go and move forward.
Yeah. I love that. And I guess just quickly for me, when I think of it doesn't matter in like that terms of right and wrongs, I understand that the universe is constantly balancing itself out. So anytime I make a wrong, I'm going to make it right. And anytime an event happens in the world, an anti-event happens in the equal capacity or the equal power. So for me, when you stay in the balance, that's where it's in that center point, that middle between the polarities where things, at least they don't really matter because it's just balanced. And then from that point of view, I think it's just love because everything else is just arising out of love. So if I can acknowledge the love in the experience, then I mean that's kind of the whole goal for me, because it's like picking up like super coins or something from a game perspective. Every time you like recognize love and God in the experience, it's like you get a boost.
Yeah.
You get this surge of energy spiritually. So yeah, Ben, I could talk to you for hours and hours, mate. This stuff is the kind of topics I love talking about. So I'd love to.
Let's do it again.
Yeah, I'd love to invite you on again in the future, and we'll set another one up. Where can people find you, get in contact with you, and see your work that you're putting out there in the world?
Yeah, sure. So easiest places on my website, which is just bencolder.co.uk. And so that's my kind of work in the UK in a lot of ways. And then you can find me on Facebook, Ben Calder Integral Health, and you can also find me on Instagram, Benji Calder. So just stick my name in somewhere, I'll show up, no doubt, and connect, come and chat, come and hang out. Come and practice some qigong, come and do some meditation. There's lots of fun stuff we can do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I recommend people check out your work for a truly integral approach, which is just that stuff it's so fulfilling. The integral approach really had a profound impact on my life. So just grateful to have this conversation with you. And
thanks, Lachlan. It's been beautiful, really.
Yeah, just want to thank you for all the work you've done on yourself, the work you do out in the world, for joining the show. So just a whole lot of love and reverence for you, Ben.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. You keep doing your work too, man. It's beautiful.
Absolutely.